And I'm Heidi. I'm codependent, and I'm just here to talk about my journey of recovery, and as a codependent, and specific to the topic of happiness. And um, you know, I just did this same material for a different group over in California, and it's so fun for me to put together a workshop, because I get to go over, like, where did I start? How did it feel? What worked? What didn't work? Why was I doing what I was doing? What was I doing to get in the way? So it's just fun to put together new workshops, and it all kind of comes back to the same shit. Like, no matter what the topic is, it's usually shame that got in the way, and shame. I believe shame is such the core of our codependence. And and then in order to manage our shame, we have all of the patterns, the patterns and characteristics of codependency. And those look different, for different ones of us. There's control and compliance and self-esteem, and but a lot of it comes down to faith. A lot of it comes down to the abandonment that most of us have experienced, abandonment. And we're in our codependency patterns and characteristics are about medicating and trying to survive the abandonment that we still feel inside. And codependency recovery is about stopping the pattern of abandoning ourselves. We don't even know when we get here, that I sure didn't, that I was in a chronic state of self-abandonment, and looking to others for my well-being, looking to others for my validation, looking to others for my self-esteem. And so we want to, in our steps and in our journey with our higher power, we want to build that inner sanctuary of self-reliance. And it doesn't mean that we still don't need others. That's the messed up part about it, right? Wouldn't it be nice if we could just go live on an island somewhere and be happy? But we don't get that option, right? Because that's self-abandonment too. And we are complex beings of lots and lots of needs and wants and desires. Most of us have another layer of big wounds. I certainly do. And then the dysfunctional ways that we learned how to survive those as children, and then we carry those into our adult lives. And so that's what we're trying to undo and find, but so many times in my life have I just sat and said, why can't I just be happy? And gosh, like, when I think about that now, it's so much clearer why I couldn't be happy, and why I wasn't happy, and what was blocking, what blocks me from my happiness. And so I just wanted to share some insights and some of my experience, strength, and hope around that, to maybe give people a little bit of a shortcut to getting to feeling better while you're on the journey of healing. We all have this journey of healing, and it for me, it'll probably take my whole life, and I've surrendered to the fact that, like, I'm happy enough today. Like, I have a great life. I'm really happy, even when shit is going down, and it does. Life on life's terms. Like, things happen, and there's always events and situations that are less than ideal. And situation and events that are painful. And so, should I be happy all the time? No, I shouldn't be happy all the time. But should I have an underlying sense of happiness and well-being? Yes, you bet I should, and I can. And CoDA has given me that. So that's what I want to share about, is like how to get there as often as you can, and maybe remove some of the blocks while you're still committed to and devoted to a journey of health and healing, well-being, getting toxic people out, pulling healthy people in, cleaning out our own toxic core shame, our own toxic fears, but still making happiness important today, because it's what we all want. We all just want to be happy, and and 90, everything that we're looking for, usually, the things that we're chasing, the relationship, the money, the security, the whatever, it's because we think it will make us happy, and that's why we chase it, and so in recovery, we're pursuing health and a relationship with a God of our own understanding, and we're pursuing reality. A lot of us are like, we're committed to reality, damn it. I'm done with the lying to myself and the denial and the chasing things that just have short-term benefit. I want to be happy, and I want to be in reality and not have the other shoe drop all the time and just feel like that I have to start over, so I'm not going to share my story. Most of you have probably heard my story 100 times anyway. I share quite a bit, and it's recorded and out there and what have you. There will be pieces of my story that will come through, in our conversation, but I really wanted to drill into the pieces that meant a lot to me as I discovered them along the way. I'll tell you that I've been in CoDA for 14 years. My 15th birthday will be coming up in July, and I treasure my CoDA time. Like I have gotten so much out of CoDA that I never knew I needed, and I just love CoDA. I mean, it's really the core of my life, and and my people, my people are in CoDA, and and I want to qualify also by saying that I'm a drug addict in recovery. I have 23 years now, clean. And I got clean in Narcotics Anonymous, and that was my first 12-step program. And then eventually I hit a bottom with my emotional, my emotional addictions, and got into CoDA. And but I would have never done progress. I wouldn't have made the progress in CoDA if I didn't have an NA program too. I have to stay off drugs to find sanity. There's that. So and I'm an abuse survivor of incest. And my parents were very codependent, very addicted, workaholics, rageaholics. My mom was a religiosity-aholic. My dad's a sex addict. And so, lots of codependency, and then all of the addictions that I believe are the symptoms of codependency, And so, both my parents had tons of toxic shame and deep childhood wounds that never got addressed. And they did their best to try to find a way to survive that. And, but a lot of that stuff got passed down to me and my sisters. I'm one of 5. I'm number 2 of 5 girls. So happiness, what a great topic. But we're going to talk a lot about what blocks happiness too. And because, and I'll just start with Webster's definition. So a state of well-being and contentment, joy, a pleasurable or satisfying experience. In recovery, we could also define it as a state of serenity, pleasant, positive emotions. So happiness is yummy feelings, good and yummy feelings. My spiritual awakening and recovery has led me to believe it's God's will for us to have happiness and well-being through taking care of ourselves. When I got here, my relationship with God was very different. I really believed in the God. There was a lot of leftovers, let's say, from the God of my childhood understanding, and through religion and through my mom and dad's belief systems. I was taught that God was loving, but had lots of big expectations of me to be perfect, to be a servant, to save other people's souls, to self-abandon, and so that that it was preferable to be self-sacrificing, that those were that those were traits that my higher power wanted for me. That was God's will, that God's will was for me to be sacrificial of myself, to put others first, to always think about the future, not think about right now. So, that definitely reinforced a lot of my codependent patterns and behaviors, was having this expectation of becoming a martyr, basically, and that was esteemable in the eyes of my higher power. And if I wasn't, a good child of God, that I would burn in hell forever, that I would be lost and abandoned from God, that I would not be able to live in the kingdom, of heaven. And as a young girl growing up, those were powerful values that were imposed on me. And there was no room for negotiation around that stuff. It was black and white, go live on a cloud with God and everything you ever wanted, or over here burning into a crisp for the rest of eternity, and children are very literal. I took that very literal. There was no question in my mind which side of that, equation I wanted to be on. So I got busy, definitely working towards rescuing others, saving others, self-abandoning, don't be selfish, beating myself up, flogging myself regularly, berating myself, looking for what was wrong with me, never looking for what was right. On this path of building that chronic self-abandonment. And so religion was part of the problem in my case, from my childhood, the values that were passed down to me through my mom's religion mostly. And so it was a big deal for me to find a God that wanted me to be happy. Like, who knew that God wanted me to be happy? And I really had to rewrite everything from the beginning, because I knew two ways of being. One was being the martyr and being and self-abandoning on the one end of the extreme, and the other end of the extreme was being purely selfish, doing everything you want, breaking all the rules, not considering others, and being greedy, let's say, and self-centered, and so it felt like I was picking between those two things, just the same way that in a child's brain, things are very black and white and very simplistic. And in the same way that I felt like I was choosing between heaven and hell, I felt like I was choosing between, being selfless or being selfish. And what I understand today is that maturity and being an adult and being a human being is a much more, it's a much more complex process. There's a lot more options in there. There's so much more than the black and white thinking of that child that I was, that had to pick between those two very simple ideas, and so I started to do the work around letting myself be happy. And unfortunately for me, as a martyr, it didn't feel really good. So yeah, there's this breakthrough moment of, oh, I get to be happy and it's God's will for me to be happy. But then when my martyrism is built into my identity, my self-esteem, my survival mechanisms, I feel very threatened by that. Who am I now if I'm not this person that sacrifices and runs around trying to fix everybody? And you know what I mean? I felt like somebody just took my compass and threw it on the ground and smashed it. I don't know where to go. I don't know what, and my brain is not lined up with, yet, wasn't yet lined up with self-care concepts and values. So it didn't feel good to take care of myself. It felt threatening. It felt scary. It felt like I was going to go to hell. It brought up all my childhood, religious trauma. And I was in withdrawal from the fantasy of self-sacrifice at the same time. So it doesn't feel good maybe for a minute, it feels good to go indulge in something, but then the guilt and shame comes in and says, oh, but I don't deserve that. Oh, I can't, or and over years and years and years, my brain was wired to give me dopamine and serotonin and a sense of well-being based on how much I sacrificed, or how much I could take of something, or how hard I worked. So, reframing our whole value system means really rewiring our brains. And it took me years, of doing the right thing and using new values and reassuring and calming myself down when my nervous system would get crazy, in order to learn that I am safe to care for me. I don't have to be a sacrificial lamb. There's not a bolt of lightning going to come out of the sky and strike me down. I'm not going to go burn in hell forever, based on, taking myself out to get my nails done, and so, but, it feels crazy in the beginning. For me, it felt crazy because my trauma started surfacing. I had that self-sacrifice story medicated my trauma, medicated my shame, medicated my guilt for so long that when I start walking around and thinking that I'm an equal to others, it feels very, very scary. Like someone just changed all the rules and I don't know who I am and I don't know how to feel safe here. And that's really what the patterns and characteristics are for me, as a way to try to feel safe, and unfortunately, I found the best methods that felt safe in a dysfunctional home, as a child, and on, toxic addicted parents. And those rules that I made and patterns and characteristics that I was living don't work in the real world when you have healthy people around. And that's what we want to do. We want to get healthy people around. So we gotta revise all that stuff, and it's a chore. It's a chore for our brains. And so I'm going to just keep reading. So our entire body, mind, and spirit is designed to maintain a baseline of well-being and happiness. God loves us. That's how he created us. Our negative emotions are negative simply because they are not happiness. And we are motivated to resolve them and get back to the state of well-being. Based on the principles that I was taught by religion, things that feel good are dangerous because those are temptation, right? And so anything that's good is probably temptation and you should probably avoid it, and that, that's not my truth today. I think that God wants me to experience joy and fulfillment and well-being. Our emotional compass will always point us back to happiness. We just need to use our higher power as true north and line up with what it's telling us. What a perfect system that speaks of God's love for us. Seeking happiness through God's will allows us to be carried by our faith, certain that we're being cared for adequately, including our need for happiness. Miraculous things happen when we let go, because we are exercising faith and seeking God's will by allowing and leaving room for God to problem solve. And he is a master problem solver. Stretch yourself to see the good in people and life. Allow yourself to experience happiness from it. So I'm going to keep on moving down through my notes here. All right, so happiness in the inner child. The longing for the return to happiness is a deep grief that many of us can relate to. I believe it's because happiness is the natural, joyful state of a child who has their basic needs met, emotionally, physically, spiritually, etc. For a child in a healthy home, happiness contains the condition of things being taken care of by others. And then the child is allowed to focus on the expansion of our being through wanting more, doing more, achieving more, learning more, experiencing more, becoming more, feeling more, understanding more, and all that balanced with the comfort and safety of our primary needs being met. The child can retreat from the stress of all that moreness, that expansion of life and learning, into the comfort of contentment, like leaning back into the comfort zone of well-being and familiar successes. This cycle supports our forward growth and maturing. So we do the more for a while, and then there's lean back into the contentment and familiar. Then there's more for a while, then the contentment. Then there's more for a while, and then there's contentment. So it's like swimming underwater and then coming up for air, and then swimming underwater and then coming up for air. It's a balancing act of the desire for outward expansion, which I think also is what God built us to do, and the inward well-being, where we're safe, where we're protected, where we're loved, where we have an inner sanctuary of our own core sense of well-being. But when our need for love, approval, guidance, and acceptance are not met as children, we develop toxic shame, the painful feeling of being unlovable, abandoned, and not enough, fearful of life, and blaming ourselves. This blocks our ability to experience joy, well-being, and our need for expansion. If our needs weren't met for a short while, we are able to bounce back. Humans are resilient, especially kids. If they weren't met over a prolonged amount of time, this caused childhood trauma, which most of us probably have. As a child, we used what we could in our limited capacity to relieve our pain. So we learned to settle for power, pleasure, approval, or other conditions we felt we could control to create positive feelings. So because those positive feelings were not there for us naturally, because someone else wasn't taking care of us, we weren't, for whatever reason, we weren't being taken care of, then we would naturally have that joyful state of expansion and somebody overseeing and watching out for us as we're in that exploring this and learning how to build something. And, oh, I want to learn how to cook, or, oh, this tastes new, or, oh, I like how it is. Oh, I like to learn all the names of the animals. Oh, I like to learn how a hammer and nail works, just all of the excitement of being a kid, and the world is just this playground, right? And but those of us where our needs are not being met and we're being shamed, scolded, we're experiencing chronic pain, and we learn how to self-abandon, then we have to learn how to settle for whatever relief we can get. And that relief is often in those forms, power, pleasure, approval, or other conditions that we felt we could control to create positive feelings. Eventually, those become our patterns and characteristics of codependence, which were just a drug to survive our core shame wound. As adults, we have often long forgotten or never known the steady stream of well-being and happiness that we need, rather than the ups and downs of addictively chasing fleeting substitutes. We have learned to survive on relief from pain instead of true happiness. I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but I thought happiness was relief. And that's because I was in a state of chronic pain, chronic abandonment, chronic worry, chronic, codependency. And, codependency and the core shame that creates all the patterns and characteristics that have all the consequences that keep all that chronic going. As adults, we have, I already read that part. Let's see. We have learned to survive on relief from pain instead of true happiness. But relief is just relief. It really is just the end of pain, or a break from pain, or a break from sadness, or a break from negative emotions, a break from loneliness. But it feels so good to be able to breathe again. That joy, just like, we feel like that relief. So I had to learn how to distinguish relief from pain, from true joy that I can nurture and create, from healthy behaviors and healthy thinking. So we don't have to settle for just relief, because in order to settle for relief, we have to keep creating the condition of chronic pain so that we can have relief from it, right? That doesn't sound very fun, but been there, done that, you know. Okay. Or on getting high with excitement, control, adrenaline, one up, instead of a stable sense of home, well-being, and love. And getting high, you know, which I like to equate that with the one up of managing my shame, you know, that one up feeling of, I've got it now, I'm in control, I'm good enough, see, I just did this, see, I can, you know, and really a lot of that one up might be just over me. It might just be over my inner core shame. It doesn't necessarily have to be a one up over you or someone else. I don't have to necessarily feel better than others, although in my shame management, I often have done that, you know, where I feel superior to others. But the one up, even over me, still keeps me in cycling into a chronic state of, you know, of in my shame. And it's very different. That one up energy is very different from authentic right size joy. Find my place again. I'm gonna have to start doing this. Okay. To amplify this problem, we often don't feel safe when we do experience happiness because of childhood and adult experiences. Having happiness and then losing it and blaming ourselves made us afraid if we got some, we'd lose it again. And we're afraid of the shame and disappointment. So we stopped seeking or allowing it. So when we were shamed or abused, when we were innocently playing, innocence is then associated with shame. So we abandon and avoid our innocence and instead get into patterns of control or compliance. You know, just like lighthearted playing in the mud when you're a kid, and then your parent comes out and you got your new shoes all muddy, and you're shamed and yelled at and you know, punished for that. And so, you know, children don't know how to distinguish, you know, all of those components of that event, of that traumatic event. You know, healthy parents can have healthy right size discipline. I had toxic parents that were over shaming, over reactive to anything that had to do with them having to do more work because they were workaholics and they were always overexhausted, and so they would often rage, you know, if they caught me doing something wrong that was going to create some problem or cause some extra cleaning or ruin something that cost them money, you know. So then I would be abused in that situation. And so as a child, I don't really, you know, I have enough framework maybe to say, don't get things dirty, don't get things dirty. But there's also this association with the innocence and the lightheartedness of play. And so then when I'm playing lighthearted, there's that PTSD that shows up that says, oh, you're not safe. Oh, better wait for the other shoe to drop. Oh, what are you doing wrong? Oh, someone's going to come in and get me. Someone's going to get me. I'm going to do something wrong. I must be doing something wrong. And that is associated with that lighthearted play, that is associated with that, you know, that God-given child's adventurous desire for expansion. Ooh, what happens when I do this? What happens when I put that in there? What happens? And the child's curiosity. And so now I've got, you know, shame and pain and fear attached to that child's curiosity. And it's all wrapped up in this big PTSD bubble that I can't get to, you know, and I don't know why I don't want to play. I want to go play with something that's that I can control. I don't want to try new things. Maybe I want to go do things that are familiar. I've tested them out. You know, maybe it's play that my mom and dad do. I would always mimic them, because if they did it, then it was probably safe for me to also do it. But something that was out here that they weren't interested in, or that I'd never tried before, or that I never saw anybody do, like, those are off the table. I didn't even try that stuff, you know, because that innocence, that unknown part, and then we dumb our lives down into this little box of what's safe. And it's really powerful to go in and do the work with your inner child to see what messages are there. And, talk to your little kids. Why don't you want to try new things? What is scary about that? Okay, what if we challenge that? What if we just take a baby step in that area? Inner child work is so powerful. I'll talk more about that later too. So the same thing happens with vulnerability and shame, or creativity and shame, or intimacy and shame. So let's say that, we had a girlfriend come spend the night, and, we made a blanket fort, and we're sitting in there, and we have a flashlight, and we're being silly and telling stories, and we've got intimacy going on, we've got play going on, we've got that lighthearted spirit of the child going on. Back to the blanket fort. So I've got, so now I've got shame, fear, attached to intimacy, and I'm a child, so I don't know those connections exist. I just know that my PTSD tells me when I start getting really close to somebody and I feel, silly and giggly and having fun, I also get really nervous, and I feel like we need to be watching out. We need to, oh, don't make a mess. Oh, let's keep things organized. Oh, so, a child's associations in their brain and how that PTSD works, are very powerful. And then that uncomfortable feeling leads to decisions that lead to decisions that lead to decisions. And then there's so many layers. That's why we call it peeling the onion, right? To get back to like, why do I do what I do? Why do I miss out on what I miss out? So we want to take a look at what did our child experience that damaged their ability to be happy? And we need to care about that. Same thing happens with vulnerability and shame, or creativity and shame, or intimacy and shame. Sometimes our happiness as children triggered our parents' unresolved trauma, and we were groomed away from expressions of happiness. Me and my friends or my sisters being joyful and giggly and running around the house used to piss my dad off to no end. And so, we learned how to play quiet. We learned how to go outside. We learned how to hide. We learned how to, we did what we could do to dumb it down, but we learned how to squash our happiness down into acceptable ways of playing. And I lost out on a lot of playing with my own kids because, if I tried to play with them, or if they became too exuberant, I would try to settle that down too, settle that down. And because I got PTSD going on when people get crazy and they're running all over the house and dogs are barking and, something might get broken. Oh my God. And then it's like the end of the world if something gets broken, So if we were over, I already read that part. Okay. We hit our happiness like a selfish indulgence. We may have, I did. Now we need to separate the feelings and events, draw new conclusions and beliefs, and heal our ability to be happy. Lots of sorting out, lots of care. So let's stop chasing lousy substitutes and blaming ourselves and get into the business of caring for ourselves. We deserve it, and no one can do it for us but us. I can't wait for someone else to do it for me. So I'm going to talk about true happiness versus fantasy addiction. So identifying what is not happiness. What have I been settling for? So true happiness is feelings of positive well-being in the now. I experience it as the healthy backdrop of my emotions, my day, and my life. Fantasy is basically stories we make up to fix or avoid our authentic feelings and override them with preferable feelings. So I don't like how this feels, so I go over here and I create this story that makes me feel different. Bottom line, fantasy addiction. And then our brain, our thoughts become like the liquor store, let's say, of my addiction, where I could think about this, I could think about that, I could think about this, and I could think about that, and it changes how I feel, and I avoid caring about whatever it is that actually needs my attention, my feelings, my situation, my conditions. I'm not caring for that. I'm just over here changing how I feel by creating a story. And over time, this process of making things up based on the resulting feeling, instead of having cornerstones of reality in our discernment, creates fantasy addiction. That has been a cornerstone of my codependence. It becomes built into our thinking process, and we accept it as truth and follow its misdirection. This may allow us to feel better in the moment, but our authentic feelings are being denied and neglected, not cared for. And without healthy validation, release, and resolution, unexpressed emotions can cause us emotional and physical discord and disease. Plus, we are denying important data that will help us navigate our lives with decisions, boundaries, and desires. We're just like tunnel vision over here, avoiding all this stuff, avoiding the feelings of it, and our emotional compass isn't working. Our value system isn't coming into play with all that. We've just got this tunnel vision, and we're compartmentalized, just focusing on this to drown all that out. Powerful way of surviving trauma, but not a very effective way to live as an adult. Now, in addition, and perhaps even more damaging, is that we don't gain emotional maturity or wisdom that comes from having a healthy emotional compass, developing stronger emotional resilience, and a deepening of our values, truths, and understanding of ourselves and our world. The worst part of fantasy addiction is that it doesn't last, says the addict, and creates big highs and lows, because we are neglecting the real issue, the feelings that need our attention. The positive emotion we get from fantasy is more like a temporary Band-Aid high of intensity, which quickly drains our serotonin reserves, and soon leaves us feeling unhappy again. Like we get this big burst of whatever, and then we're unhappy and miserable again, But besides that, eventually the denial is broken and our illusion shatters, allowing our fear and shame to come flooding back in as we find ourselves in a shame spiral. Story of my life, pre-recovery. Since all addiction is progressive, we will either create a bigger, more elaborate fantasy to fix the shame, or perhaps switch addictions and move into a victim fantasy or a martyr fantasy, to mask our hurt feelings and our inability to care for them. Again, that kind of goes back to the relief. If I can create a victim fantasy or a martyr fantasy story in my head, at least I get relief. I get the high of relief from the pain of the shame. Oh, well, it's really their fault because they da-da-da-da-da, and I never blah, 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 and that little one-up victim fantasy story that I'm telling in there is not really caring for the feelings. It's really avoiding the feelings and pushing them out or driving them out with feelings that I'm intensifying with, the more intense my story is, and when I'm making an intense story to create intense feelings, I have to intensify the drama around it. So if I'm making someone the bad guy, I'm making him a way bigger bad guy than they maybe actually are. And I did this chronically, and we call that villainizing somebody, and so we might villainize somebody to create the intensity of how wrong it was what they did, and that increases the intensity of what a victim I am, and all of that serves to just medicate the shame or the fear or whatever, the avoidance that I'm playing out in my fantasy addiction. Over time, our brains are trained to need the promise of future to feel better now. And anything good that is happening now is inadequate to create a lasting sense of happiness. Ever been doing something that you've looked forward to for a long time, but instead of feeling present, being present and enjoying it, you're thinking about the next thing or how you can do it again. And I found myself doing that in my earlier recovery when I was hiking. I would think about hiking all week long. I can't wait to get out on the trail. Oh my gosh, I'm going to go do this trail. I haven't done it before. The flowers are going to be out. Last time I saw, a deer, and just get super excited about something that makes me happy. And then I'm out there on the trail, the next weekend or whatever, and I can't be present. All I'm thinking about is, where am I going to hike next weekend? Where am I going to hike next weekend? And there I am, and there's the deer, and there's the trail, and there's the flowers, and I'm up in my head obsessing about what trail am I going to be on next weekend? I don't know how to be present with myself. If I'm a fantasy addict, my brain is trained to get happy and excited and feel safe and get fulfillment from thoughts, not from reality, not from my experience, not from my situation, not from my environment, and not from being present, not from the present. And so we have to take a look for that. This is happiness resistant and fantasy addicted, and that was hard to overcome for me. By contrast, true happiness is not fleeting. It is a sustainable, strong stream of well-being anchored in our spiritual principles and positive beliefs about ourselves and our lives. It doesn't go away just because we go to sleep or have a tough day, because it's the truth about us, and it's our belief system, and it's not just a fantasy thought that we put as a Band-Aid on ourselves or our lives, or just because plans fall through and we're disappointed. So if something happens and we're disappointed, we deal with our disappointment. We walk through the sadness. We feel the sadness. We release it, but it isn't all consuming, and it doesn't make us depressed. If we've got depression going on based on one event, it's probably because we had some fantasy addiction going on and we're in withdrawal or hopelessness. Things that hurt us when we have a sense of well-being are challenging, but rarely devastating. I'm Heidi, I'm codependent, and we're talking about happiness. And I'm going to move down in my notes here. So we just talked about fantasy addiction versus true happiness. And so how do you break fantasy addiction and then develop true happiness? It's not a stop this one day and start doing it different. It's like all recovery pretty much, that we implement a little at a time, and we keep moving towards change, and our brains get back on board, and we, walk through the process with our sponsors and people that have gone down the road before us, so that they can tell us what they experienced, and we can make sense of what's happening in our minds and in our hearts and in our bodies, and why we're confused, why we feel like it's not working. We've got to have support for that, because otherwise we try it once and it doesn't work, and then we just stop. So we want to make sure that we have a good, strong network. So how to break fantasy addiction and develop true happiness. And this is just we could do a workshop, on just this talk, or this part of it, but I tried to condense it so that we could at least go over it and give you guys some tools that have worked for me. So you got to build reality muscle, and I didn't have any of that when I got here. I knew how to get out of reality. That's what I knew. I was really good at that. I knew how to get out of reality or change reality, deny reality, and I used to laugh, but I deny your reality and insert my own, and I would laugh about it, but really I did that. We learn to live in the unknown, so instead of settling for, we found our safety in controlling things, and as codependents in recovery, we want to learn how to find our safety in our higher power. We want to find our safety in the principles that we live by, We know that there's a power greater than ourselves that is overlooking and overseeing and caring for our well-being at all times, and that we're doing our part by listening, by paying attention, by caring, by being present, by feeling our feelings, by getting our emotional compass up and running again. And so, but in that, there's the disappointment is that we're never going to be fully in control. And that's what we've been trying to do our whole lives, is to be in control of everything. And so we have to learn how to live in the unknown and still feel safe. We have to learn how to live in the unknown in order to be available for true joy. So, and then we have to trust in the process, and trust is built with hope and then practice, and it doesn't come any other way. Otherwise, it's just another fantasy. And over time with all that, what has happened for me is that I learn a little, I practice a little, I backslide a lot, I keep moving forward, and my nervous system heals, my PTSD heals, my brain's ability to discern things and feel certainty and not get just knocked off the rails just by any crazy fantasy fear or any crazy fantasy thought, and I build emotional resilience. And so, there's maturity is what happens, emotional maturity, spiritual maturity, mental maturity is what happens. And sometimes maturity in a way that we very rarely have seen even modeled by other people. We didn't watch our parents were dysfunctional and they were codependent or addicted. They didn't have maturity. We often thought of maturity as self-abandonment, right? The ability to sacrifice, the ability to work hard, that's not really maturity, so we have to redefine what we value in terms of maturity. Some things to think about. So to break fantasy addiction and develop true happiness, we want to confront the shame-based lies of codependence. We're not enough. All of that stream of stories, right? And to create a new reality-based thoughts that care for you, but don't get you high. And so I call that right-sized thinking, where we're not in those two extremes of nothing ever goes my way, everything is supposed to go my way, but instead we want to be in the place of I'm available. Some days life is hard. Some days things go the way you want it to. Sometimes you get a brick wall. Sometimes you get a red carpet. And I'm available for those experiences, and I have God at my back, and I walk through whatever life happens, whatever life brings me. And that all life events, grow my spirit, grow my maturity, grow my experience, make me, stronger, make me more courageous, refine and tune me, and build me into something greater and stronger and better. And we start to trust life and make life our partner instead of this, this place that, the survival, that we've been living for so long. And instead we want life to be our friend. So over time, your new happy thoughts become your beliefs, and your beliefs become your inner sanctuary of well-being. And that is what's happened for me. It's not like life doesn't happen anymore, but I have a sanctuary of well-being, of all the things, the truth of who I am, the truth of how powerful my God is, the truth of the resources that are truly available to me. And I've gotten all my fears, instead of them being like this, my fears are small, they're right-sized, and I don't need to avoid them. I care for them. I care for my fears. I care for my sadness. I care for my feelings. And I have tools for that. I've practiced with that. And I have tools for when it's too big for me. I have tools for that too. And whatever life brings me that I don't have tools for, I can ask for more tools, because your higher power is a mastermind of everything, can bring you whatever you need for whatever the situation is. And, when it comes down to it, it's like, I need less fear, but really I need a bigger God. And if my fears are that big, I just need a bigger God, So I invite you to use my God. My God's really big. So this is an exercise. We're not going to have time to do this here today, but I do want you guys to take this with you if you're interested. And this really kind of talks about the process of maturing those thoughts and changing our codependent beliefs into healthy, right-sized thoughts, but not getting high off of them. So let's look at a few of those. Like a codependent belief that I had is nothing ever works out for me. And, when I was in a shame spiral, that would always pop out of my mouth. That'd always be, nothing ever works out for me, and I would just reaffirm that and reaffirm that and reaffirm that. And of course, then, I'm seeing that everywhere that I look when I'm looking for that, because that's what I'm looking for. Right. And there's some victim in that, for sure. So my fantasy thought is, and this is an example. So if I can get this job, everything will work out for me. So to fix that codependent belief, nothing ever works out for me, I create the fantasy thought, and that fixes that fear for a minute, but then also shoots me in the foot, because there's no room around that except for perfection. Everything will work out for me. So then when it doesn't work out for me, I shame spiral right back into the nothing works out for me. So I can't use that kind of fantasy thinking. It just doesn't work. It medicates it for a minute. It might get me motivated to actually get out there and go to a job interview, let's say, but it's going to always let me down, because it's not right sized. It's not a healthy, happy reality thought. So let's take a look at a happy, right sized reality thought. There have been some painful disappointments in my life, but I am now healing and learning tools to care for my hurt as well as my important needs and wants. And the freedom in that, the maturity in that, the turning it over in that, the faith in that expands me, that strengthens my spirit. It strengthens my truth around that. And I'm not using a little kid's thinking process, to manage adult problems. So another one, codependent belief, there's something wrong with me. And the fantasy thought that fixes the codependent belief is, if I do everything perfect, I will be enough. And so then I'm just on this mission, always chronic mission of doing it perfect, doing it perfect, doing it perfect. That always leads me to a shame spiral for sure, and then I'm sitting there in shame going, there's something wrong with me. So the fantasy thinking doesn't work. And the happy reality thought instead would be, I am enough just as I am. And I continue to work towards a happier, healthier me because I deserve it. So I've got esteeming in there. I've got self-love in there. I've got right-sized believing in myself. And I'm pulling, I continue to work. So I'm esteeming myself for my resilience. I'm esteeming myself for my courage. Another codependent belief, life is too hard. Fantasy thought, I'll feel better tomorrow, so I'm just not getting out of bed, and then the self-abandonment of depression, letting depression set in, and not that depression is not a mental illness for sure, and I'm not saying we can all fantasy think or we can't think our depression away or a mental illness away. So I don't want anyone to feel like I'm disvalidating mental illness or depression. Those are very severe and need our care, and sometimes with medication. But the fantasy thought, I'll feel better tomorrow, so I'm just not getting out of bed, which is a form of sabotage, and hopelessness and giving up, and I'm a victim. And a happy reality thought, when I feel overwhelmed, I pray, slow down, take one thing at a time, and esteem myself for not giving up, because I am valuable and lovable. And my well-being isn't dependent on whether I get out of bed or not, but just if I believe in me and I do the best I can in this moment to take care of myself. And sometimes the best I can is to not get out of bed. But I'm not going to have a fantasy thought that says tomorrow will be better to justify me being in self-abandonment. I don't want to do that, because then I could just do it tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day, and I have. So anyway, I'm going to switch pages and keep going. So chronic worry, another big thing that blocks happiness. Some beliefs that sustain my core happiness are my faith in my higher power, which provides essential love and safety, my deepening joy in taking care of me, and trust that the future holds good things. Without these essential truths integrated into our inner sanctuary, we can be painfully ruled by fear in the form of chronic worry or fear addiction. For sure, I was addicted to fear and chronic worry when I got to CoDA, and for my first handful of years in CoDA. We are often so addicted that we don't even realize that we are at some level always taking stock of what is stressful, pressures, things to do, fears of what might happen, what others think, how difficult life is, etc. It's just like this, like an app on our phone that's like in our head that's always running. What is there to worry about? What is there to worry about? What is there to worry about? The negative thinking the negative thinking addiction robs us of any sense of safety. Hence, we don't experience happiness and well-being because we're up in our head thinking about what's wrong. We're not available for a gratitude list, all the things that are going right, all the good things that may happen. We're not thinking about that. We're thinking about the bad things that might happen because that little kid inside of us is like, better be ready, better not trust, better not turn your back, better not let it surprise you, because then you'll have your ass kicked, by whatever the situation is, plus be ashamed that you didn't see it coming, because somehow our little kid believed that they could control everything and they had a crystal ball and they were supposed to know what was going to happen. And so when we're in chronic state of worry, we have that denial that we're playing God, always like trying to peer through the events and the people and the things and looking for the worst, always looking for the worst, and then we'll shift from that addiction. When that addiction becomes overwhelming and painful, then we switch to the positive fantasy addiction of all the good things that are going to happen, how perfect things are going to be when I find the right guy or when I get the perfect job or blah, 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 blah. So we'll switch those off. A lot of us lean more towards the negative chronic worry fantasies. Some of us lean more towards the chronic perfection, fantasies. But they're like drugs that are medicating the reality of how we feel, our shame or our fears, and our not being able to manage things from a reality place, with right size skills and care and looking inside to see, how am I feeling? Why am I feeling that way? What does that need? That needs some soothing. And so we can be a fear addict, we can be, or a fear fantasy addict, we can be like glorifying the future and planning our whole lives, and maybe with work. So in our business world, we're building this amazing empire with all these employees and solving everyone's problem and making all this money. That may be our fantasy to escape our reality also. So let's see. The fear that was intended to prevent pain has now become the source of pain. We have to consciously choose to break the addictive thinking habits and redirect our thoughts to the truth of our strength and resourcefulness, the faith in God to care for our lives, and focus on topics of happiness, well-being, and goodness in our world, reassurance, soothing, excitement, desires, gratitude, etc. When we intervene on the fear fantasy addiction, we will enter withdrawal, which often creates anxiety, tension, or even panic. Again, why it's really important to work with a sponsor that has experience with this, because otherwise we think, that like I'm trying everything and it's not working. Walking through these uncomfortable feelings is the perfect opportunity to strengthen our relationship with our higher power, our self-parent, and others in our support group. Then we come to believe that God can restore us to sanity, our step 2, and let the healing happen. So yeah, chronic worry is big. And like, we could do a workshop just on fear addiction for sure. But let's keep moving on. Okay, so happiness and self-care. Unhappiness simply means a part of you needs some care. Happiness is our garden of emotional well-being that we tend. So its absence means that we have some weeds to pull. The same way that feelings of healthy shame is our nudge to tend to our values and our integrity. Sadness is our nudge to tend to our joy and happiness. So a lot of times, and the reason I say that is because when I felt unhappy, I also felt ashamed, like something's wrong with me, I'm doing something wrong. And so I needed to get that fear right sized and say, no, if I'm unhappy, it just means I need to care for myself. It's not like, I have to revamp my whole life from the beginning, or, there's, I don't know if I think I had this belief that if I'm unhappy, no one will like me and everyone will leave me. So unhappiness equals abandonment. And it's associated with abandonment, that like, I'm not cool enough, or I'm not interesting enough. No one will like me. No one will hang out with me. No one will want to be around me if I'm depressed or sad or, whatever. So it felt really scary to be unhappy. And today I accept that there's times I'm unhappy, and I love and care for myself. And I have friends that love and care for me also, that are in recovery. It's likely that you have an unresolved negative emotion or defective character standing between you and your authentic happy self. Maybe it's judgment, expectations, fear, shame, stuffed feelings. Perhaps you have a perception, story, or belief that's blocking you from taking steps in your life to align with happiness. Shame stops us from experiencing new things or old things that we have negative experiences with. As we heal the shame, our possibilities of happiness expand. Taking care of ourselves is how we bring love and hope to the problem. Caring for ourselves is a continuous maintenance job. And if we have self-love, it is a joyful experience. If we don't love ourselves, it feels like a bother and an obligation. Self-love builds care, and care builds self-love. So approach it from both ends. When self-care is a joy, it doesn't feel like a chore, and your brain chemistry gets on board with chemicals of motivation, inspiration, and positive reward. It's a joy to care for myself. When I first got into CoDA, it was a pain in the ass, and it was distracting me from what I really wanted, which was to be happy. And I did not know that caring for me was the process of getting happy and getting right-sized happiness. I thought that it was just a requirement that my therapist and my sponsor were telling me to do. Oh, take better care of yourself. Oh, well, what do you need right now? That it felt like a foreign language. Today, it is the fastest way for me to get back into balance and then restore my happiness, my sense of happiness and well-being. How do we care? We get involved. We ask questions. We get curious with the intention of providing relief, not finding blame. We take baby steps and leaps of faith. We don't give up no matter what. We come to believe we are worthy and valuable as a result of being treated as such, sometimes for the first times in our lives. And it is our responsibility to treat us well and take good care of us and show us that we are important and valuable and worthy, even if we're unhappy, even if we're sad, even if we're toxic, even if we're, even if we're whatever. So I wanted to give you guys a chance to do a little bit of writing and reflecting and sharing with each other. So what we're going to do is this quick little step 1, 2, and 3. So step 1, what am I powerless over that blocks me from happiness in my heart? Step 2, do I believe that my higher power can restore me to sanity? Step 3, what do I need to surrender to the care of God to restore happiness in my life? So some things to, pray, write about, whatever, and then we'll do, 10 minutes of breakout rooms. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. And I hope that everybody got some clarity about what, what steps they can take, to maybe have some breakthroughs. So a couple more things that I wanted to cover, and then we're going to go ahead and close. So happiness is the result of happy thoughts, which create happy beliefs. We must align our beliefs with the good that is available to us now and stop living as if we're still helpless, wounded children. We come to believe we have a choice to create happiness and that it is worthy of our time and attention. By creating healthy, happy thoughts, we build an inner sanctuary of well-being. Well-being becomes our core belief instead of fear and shame. Then happiness isn't an exception to your negative beliefs. It is your home within. Harmony and health is the key. Get our body, mind, and spirit working together holistically, and then we'll be guided to our natural state of well-being. And that's just the process of the steps and working our recovery. All the tools are there. We just keep moving forward, and that well-being just keeps growing, especially when we're focused with self-parenting and real direct ways of healing the stories that our little kid is carrying. So some affirmations that help create healthy, happy thoughts and beliefs is, I have a good life. And it's okay for me to say that, even if my life isn't 100% good. I can say that even if life is challenging, even if life is hard, even if I'm in pain, even if I'm in grief, I can say I have a good life, and back off the shame story that says life isn't enough, everything is so hard, why can't I figure this out, right? Those are that's the line of thought that our codependency has, and that our the shame is just repeating and repeating and repeating. So we have to find a new way to talk in our minds. I have a good life. I deserve to be happy. I choose happiness, and then happy experiences are more and more common. I nurture happiness when I believe it's my nature and my birthright. I focus my attention on what I want, what I love, what makes me happy, what feels good. I care for what is painful or fearful, and then focus back on what feels good. So much of our lives, we've been focused on the negative. What am I doing wrong? What isn't working? What is, what's the scary story? I want to focus on what the scary story is. And our PTSD has trained us to do that. And it's a habit. We have to break the habit. God wants me to be happy. My happiness is my responsibility. Happiness will come more and more as I heal. It's never too late to have a happy childhood. I am having a hell of a happy childhood, I just got to say. I just got done backpacking the Grand Canyon with a whole bunch of my CoDA friends, and it was an epic 6-day adventure. And then tomorrow I'm leaving again to go back up to Utah to meet up with my sister and backpack for another week in Coyote Gulch. And, my happiness matters. I am fighting for me. I'm not waiting. There's not this day out there when I finally can live, like outdoors and nature and backpacking and camping and hiking and flowers and deer and animals and hawks. And that is my joy. And it is my responsibility to go put myself out there and not wait till the house is clean, and wait till this project's done, and wait till my sister's not sick anymore, and wait. Like I've been on hold my whole life. And when I first started doing CoDA, and I realized I needed to make amends to myself, one of my chronic patterns and characteristics was to always put myself in a place of deprivation. And I didn't know that I was depriving myself with the promise of someday. So my fantasy was, someday I'll have all this money, and I'll have all this time, and I'll have all these friends, and someday. And then over here, I'm acting out in workaholism, and busy addiction, and always being available for others, And so to break that pattern, I finally just said, I'm going to hike every weekend. And that hiking was my thing. So I'm going to go outside, and I'm going to hike every weekend. And it was like nails on a chalkboard to make myself go do it, because I always wanted to cancel because this is going on, or that's going on, or my week was too hard. And I finally just stopped that. Like, I need to take care of me no matter what. And if I had promised my little girl that I was going to take her hiking, I wasn't going to be a liar and, or let her down and not go. Now there's events where sometimes you have to change your mind, but I was chronically always putting her at the bottom of the list. And I don't do that anymore. When I make a commitment to my little kids, I get out there, I play, I go do adventures. I'm not waiting for life to start. I'm living life now. So I want to challenge all of you to look for that in your patterns and see if there's something that you need to commit to. And it's going to feel crazy when you first start doing it, but then it feels good and yummy and enriching in your life. And then you feel safe. I do. I feel safe. I'm under the best care I could possibly imagine because I love the crap out of myself. And I am not going to let my health and well-being be second to anything else. Enough of that. The shame can go, to hell because I'm not doing it. This is some stuff we don't have time for. I'm skipping that. And I do want to cover this emotional scale. So this was something that I learned in my addressing of how to care for my emotions. And so this is just how I frame it. So we want to meet ourselves wherever we are, wherever we honestly are, the reality, right? We learn to live in reality. So in reality, this is how I feel. And that is reality. We want to meet ourselves wherever we are on the emotional scale, and then appropriately self-parent or care our way up the scale. So if I'm sad, then I want to care about myself and release that sadness so I can be available to ascend up. If let's say shame is on the bottom of the scale and bliss is on the top of the scale, and happiness is a little down from bliss, but it's pretty close to that, right? And so if I'm way down here in shame, I meet myself there. I'm not in denial of it. I don't try to force some other positive emotion. That's how the fantasy addiction happens. But I meet myself where I am in the shame, and I love myself and I soothe myself. And then that shame shifts with God's help, and I can shift that shame into feeling a little better. And maybe I can just have the relief of feeling hope. Maybe I can have the relief of feeling like just acceptance. Acceptance isn't happiness, but it sure feels better than shame. And so I just want to work my way up the emotional scale. And in order to do that, I have to have intimacy with me. I have to learn the inner language of talking to me. How do I feel? What do I need? What makes me feel better? What are the messages in my head? And how to, with right-sized thinking, reassure, soothe, love, validate my way up the emotional scale. But I meet myself where I am. And that's the reality muscle. So as we care, we are removing the blocks that keep us from naturally ascending back to our natural state of happiness. So events happen, and then I naturally will release that sadness or whatever that is, and then work my way back up the scale naturally. We want to remove anything that's stopping that process, because that's what God designed. God designed emotional release so that we could return to our natural state of well-being and happiness. We don't have to do anything to create it. We just have to stop doing what we're doing that's blocking it. And that's what I didn't understand. So it's like a balloon. It's like we are a balloon and our happiness is the helium. We check to see what we're snagged on or what's causing the drag. If we're in grief, we might not be able to feel happiness, but we can feel compassion for our pain. So reach up for that, right? That's higher up than pain, is compassion. There's love in that. There's acceptance in that. There's the truth in that. There's there's value for our emotions in that. When you're in hope, happiness may be within your reach. So we just keep working our way up the scale. And that's how I've learned how to meet myself where I am authentically, where I'm not using fantasy addiction to fix how I feel, but I'm carrying my way up the emotional scale, and have realistic expectations, because many of us have a lifetime of unresolved pain. When we're first in recovery, or when we're in hard periods of growth in our recovery. And it may take a while to clear that out. And we may go through long periods of grief. And it's appropriate to be in grief, and that love and that acceptance to be like, you know what, I've been through a lot. It's appropriate for me to have grief. I'm not going to just wish that away. But I'm going to accept happiness where I can in between while I take a breather, let's say, from the grief work that I'm doing. And I'll still go make a lunch date with a friend, or I'll go to the zoo, or I'm not going to stop living life until the grief is over. I'm going to show myself that life is worth living. So anyway, and then I have a note on here that says healing our relationship with wanting, but that is another workshop because we're going to do a couple of questions or Q&A. But the way that I look at it for myself is my hope about fixing feelings, or is it about caring for feelings? And it's really the difference, if I'm using my thinking, whatever those hopeful thoughts are, to fix feelings, deny feelings, suppress feelings, or overwhelm feelings, then I'm in fantasy addiction. If I'm using the hope appropriately to care for it, then generally that means that I've gone in and I've, like, let's say sadness, if I just push the sadness out by having all this hope, I'm not really caring for the sadness. If I go talk to my inner child and I talk about the sadness and I care, where does it come from? What does it remind you of? What are you making up about that? I'm sorry that you feel that way. I'm caring, I'm validating, I'm soothing, I'm here for you, and now let's reach for a healthier, happier thought. Don't forget that this good thing is going to happen, or that good thing, or well, we've been here before and we know that good things happen. We know that when we turn things over, we know that, that feelings pass. And so I'm not avoiding or denying my feelings. I'm caring for them, which is very different from me just saying, well, this Sunday I'm going to go hiking. So I'm going to, oh, this is what it's going to feel like. This is the trail I'm going to go on, and I'm making up this story that's just drowning out the stuff that I don't want to feel, that I don't want to look at, so it's about being available for ourselves, and caring about the sadness and not just shutting it down. And that's just as an example, so it's tricky to learn the process of that. And the only way to really know if you're doing it is to get in the trenches with your inner child and with your, your deep fears and your deep sadness, and acknowledge those things, acknowledge what the shame stories are, acknowledge, that hole that's inside, and if you're caring and loving and meet yourself where you are, then it's not fantasy addiction. It's, hope is always good. We just don't want to use it to deny and avoid, Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I would say, that's really good self-awareness, first of all, and so that's, you just fix the problem right there, because you gave it to God just by your own awareness of it. Like, okay, sometimes I tend to, and I'm going to call it, for me, how I can relate to that is like that I'll go into my victim and I'll think that I'm caring about the feelings, but really I'm just getting in there and commiserating with myself, and I want to truly validate the depth of my hopelessness. I do. I think that's important, to get into the deep, that deep well of hurt and pain, and cry and mourn for the losses that we've had, there's, for sure. And when we're, when we're first in recovery, or when we're doing the deeper layers of healing our core shame, that well is really deep. It really is deep. And so something like a loss that we have today that's current in the world, or a fear that we have that's current today, it's like all of our history will attach to that, because we've got all this unresolved stuff, from all of the losses are all backed up on that one loss, so it's like we finally give permission to grieve, and then now we've got 10 losses that are all attached, so it's, I'm not just walking through the fear of losing this job, or let's say quitting a job, I'm walking through all of the repressed jobs that I've quit, changes that I've made, I mean, for 25 years, so sometimes those can be really big and really deserve a lot of time and attention. I would ask you to look for, you know, when, find ways to have a time limit with it, so again, it comes back to boundaries and self-parenting. If you find that you're canceling, canceling fun things that you do, or canceling your fun weekend plans, then instead maybe push yourself in your self-parenting to say, you know what, I got all this going on, but I'm going to trust that God is going to, and I've been so amazed sometimes, you know what I mean, that in my head, I'm like, oh, there's no way I'm going to have fun going out for sushi, let's say, going out for sushi with a group of people or something. There's no way I'm going to have fun. I got all this heaviness going on over here. But if I turn it over to God and say, all right, God, can you just give me a break? I'm not done with that, but I just need a vacation from it. I just need to go be present. I need, because my first instinct is to cancel everything. I don't want anyone to see me vulnerable, and I want to just go kind of isolate and hide out and do all my feelings and then come back my happy, perky self, so that, nobody really can judge me or gets my messiness on them, let's say. It just feels too much. So, then, and so I learned how to just say, God, can you just take this and give me a break? I know I'm not done with this work. I'm not trying to just wish it away, but I do need to come up for air, let's say, and then sometimes God will just lift it. And then sometimes God will just say, like, nope, like, cancel your plans, stay home, get half a gallon of ice cream and sit in front of the TV. Sometimes grief is that deep. And so, what I learned over time is there's not a right way and a wrong way. There's things that have a different effect. And sometimes the effect maybe is better than another time, but the overall freedom to care for yourself in whatever way that feels appropriate at the time the freedom of that and the acceptance of that has way more value than being critical and perfectionistic in how we take care of ourselves, because that's where we're doing harm. That's where we're keeping the shame alive. So we don't want to get perfectionistic and critical about how we care for ourselves. We want to leave lots of bandwidth for lots of different ways to care for ourselves. We can care for ourselves by I don't want to call it isolating, but others would maybe call it isolating. Sometimes I need to just get in my little cave and do nothing and give myself a day or two, you know what I mean? And then and do some journaling and talk to my sponsor and, get in my grief and have a little self-pity party. And that'll be okay, because I still have a self-parent that'll say, okay, time to have a boundary with that. It's time to get up and, like, let's go do something. Let's go outside. Let's go stretch our legs. Let's go let's go meet up with someone, and, but just, and like I said, it's about maturity, it will grow and it will change, so being available for that and being accepting of wherever we are with that, and then bring those boundaries in gently, those accountability boundaries. Am I hiding out from the world right now? And use our 11th step, where we're doing a daily inventory, where we're staying in touch with the sponsor, where we're voicing those concerns and putting those in our prayers. Bring it to my attention, God. If I'm like, do I just need to go create, a safe sanctuary for myself for a few days, or am I isolating? Let me know, and then try to not be perfectionistic about it, because neither one is going to make a difference. You know what I mean? What's going to make the biggest difference is your love and acceptance of whatever you do to hold yourself in a place of your own deep desire for your well-being, and your validation for yourself of what you've been through and how much it hurts and how hard it is. Those thoughts and the actions that go with those are so much more valuable than doing it right. We got to get out of the story of doing it right, or the right and wrongness of things, because that is shame. That's the language of shame.